Welcome, everybody, to episode 2 of Prabhupada Memoirs, and Hare Krishna to all that are watching. And this week, we're so fortunate that we have Brahmatirtha Prabhu, who also is known, you might know the book where he's with Srila Prabhupada called Bob. He's called Bob Cohen. So perfect questions, perfect answers. And we'll be discussing this book. But just before I bring His Grace Brahmatirtha Prabhu on, I just want to give a little brief bio about him. He is a person who academia is in his blood. He did a BS, a bachelor's in chemistry, and then later joined the Peace Corps and went to India and as a science teacher. He's also the advisor for the Environmental Protection Agency. He's also a professional mediator and co-director of Iskcon Resolve, which is so important in our Iskcon community, and director of Bhaktivedanta Institute of Higher Studies. And not just that, on the material side, he is the director of the City of Gainesville's Planning Board, and he used to be a pilot, which I'm sure we're going to be asking him about as well. So without further ado, I really want to bring him on. So please welcome His Grace Brahmatirtha Prabhu. So nice to have you here today. How are you?
Pretty good. I'm very happy to be here. I noticed my tilak washed off, but I'm still here in spirit. I'm very happy to be here, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak about His Divine Grace.
No, and just regarding His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, you yourself first had contact with the Hare Krishnas back in, I think it was Greenwich Village in New York in the late 1968. And then you met Srila Prabhupada for the first time in November 1971. How was that encounter when you first met him in 1971?
Well, like many encounters with Prabhupada, I proved that I wasn't very smart when I met him about meeting someone like him. I had heard the devotees chanting in Greenwich Village. I'm pretty sure the party, Jayadvaita Swami was on the party, and the mantra stuck in my brain. But at that time, the New York Post, a popular paper, had a centerfold every week. And in the centerfold, every week, the center part of the tabloid paper, they would have a picture of the latest guru to come from India. Because by 68, they started following Prabhupada to America. And some of them were really weirdos. And so they were making fun of it. So I couldn't figure out who's real and who's not real. I mean, there were some really strange fellows coming. And all of them were God, so it got even more confusing. And there were an awful lot of gods coming. And so I said, well, the only way I'm going to sort this out is go to India. So when I went to India, and I heard Giriraj Swami speaking at a festival in Calcutta. It was such a brilliant talk. It still sticks with me what he said, that I said, now, and I'd read the Gita in college, and I loved it, but mystified by it. So then I went and saw a sign, Hare Krishna Festival, first time I'd heard of devotees in India, went heard Giriraj Swami speak. And then I was overnight train right away as a high school teacher. I'd go into Calcutta and stay at a hostel, youth hostel, and visit the temple. And one time Prabhupada was there. So I got to meet him. And so Prabhupada said, do you have any questions? So I said, sure. I'd just come from Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha received enlightenment in Bihar, the state I lived in. And so I asked, yeah, well, you're the Hindu path. Why not the Buddhist path? I was trying to do comparative religion. So Prabhupada gave me a really good answer. And it's a very typical answer I learned that Prabhupada would give. He wasn't going to say what the Buddha said. He wanted to discuss philosophy, not Buddhism, this ism or that ism. So he asked me, so what does the Buddha say? let's discuss philosophy.
Mhm.
So I said, well, there's eightfold noble and fourfold this, or is it 4 of these and 8 of those? And I'm stuttering, making a fool of myself. Finally, I said to him, well, I don't know what the Buddha says. I can't remember. It was from Buddhism 101 in college. And,
Got you.
and he said to me, well, why are you asking the question then? So after that, I kind of said, I think I just better listen for a while. I didn't really say much else.
Wow. So it's nice how straight away you had that type of association with Srila Prabhupada and you started talking about a bit of philosophy and talking about Buddhism. That's just phenomenal how you had that association. Didn't it start then after, because 1971, after seeing Srila Prabhupada, I believe you then went to Calcutta and then Mayapur in 1972, February 1972, I think they had the festival happening. And yourself went there. And on the third day, the questions started to come again. And then Srila Prabhupada, you had an audience with Srila Prabhupada over a few days. And that's why we're so lucky that we've got the perfect questions, perfect answers coming out. So how was that meeting now that you met him first time, now 1972 in Mayapur? And you start to have these conversations with him in the Bhajan Kutir, if I'm right.
Yeah. I'll show you.
Please. So do not adjust your sets. Brahmatirtha Prabhu is coming back. There we go. Oh, wow. Oh, that's the look. So this was the actual original Bhajan Kutir,
No,
which looks very
every time there's a flood, they have to rebuild it. It's a little
okay.
bigger than it originally was. In fact, I got a note recently from Bhavananda Prabhu, because he's in charge of that part of Mayapur, saying we want to rebuild it as it was when Prabhupada was here. And they're
Wow.
going to put a display in there for perfect questions. So he was writing me about it. I had suggested to them that they make the display. The best way to glorify Prabhupada is put the display in all the 40 plus languages the book is in. And because it's one of the more translated books, it turns out. So when I was in Calcutta and ran into the devotees, as I would try to do, and one young man said to me, we just bought land in Mayapur. I didn't know what Mayapur was. And he said, we're going to be feeding Bangladesh refugees. I said, count me in. And I was on break from my teaching. So I hopped the train up to Navadweep and took a boat across the river. And Tejas met me there. He happened to see me coming. And I was the only guest at the first Mayapur festival. There were 70 devotees living in tents. There was no facility at all.
Wow.
Prabhupada had his Bhajan Kutir, and one English-speaking guest showed up, me. So Tejas had been in the Peace Corps himself in India, in South India. So we hit it off right away, and I started assuming some service that I came for, feed the Bangladesh refugees. It was only a few months after the war between India and Pakistan, and Bangladesh had become its own country from East Pakistan and all that. So there was quite a refugee crisis. Devotees were serving out unlimited khichdi. So I said, this is cool. And then he said to me, would you like to see Prabhupada? And I was a little hesitant because the first time I met Prabhupada, I put my foot in my mouth and started chewing. And he said, well, you ought to. I said, okay, I'd like to, but I didn't want to start chewing on my foot again. So I was invited to see Prabhupada. The first conversation wasn't recorded, unfortunately. But Prabhupada asked about me, what I do. And I was one of the rare people my age in India who wasn't a hippie. I was professional. Everyone else young in India from the West then had long hair and was stoned. And I didn't have long hair. Now I just long for some hair, but that's a different matter. But then I didn't have, but I, just was a teacher. And so Prabhupada asked if I had any questions, and I did. I was a little shy about it because my first experience was I really didn't have a good question. It was kind of so I thought in my mind, I said, okay. And of course, I met the devotees numerous times, and I had respect. I had taken up chanting of Hare Krishna since '68, but I didn't really understand things very well. So I said, okay, I'm going to assume he's the guru I came to India looking for. I don't know if he is. I'm going to assume so. I'm not going to challenge him on anything. I'm just going to be here to listen. And I was also serving out prasadam. So Krishna says in the Gita, just approach a spiritual master, render service, and he will give you the truth. So accidentally, I approached a spiritual master in the right mood, just in a humble mood to listen. Because after that first experience at Calcutta, I said, I ought to listen. But Prabhupada had such a charming way that he would draw me out to ask questions just by his smile, his effects, and the way he would very kindly make fun of my foibles. And it just made me feel so relaxed. And after the first hour of conversations, Shama Sundar, his secretary, said, "This is really good stuff." And he turned on the tape recorder. And then the rest of it got recorded.
Oh.
When Shama Sundar was after it was over, our conversations, a few days of conversations, Shama Sundar said to Prabhupada, "Boy, those are perfect questions." And Prabhupada said, "Yes, make this a book, perfect questions, perfect answers." And so that's how it turned out. That discussion is in Shama Sundar's Chasing the Rhino book.
Amazing. That's so the first session wasn't technically recorded, but then after that, the sessions were recorded. And before we go into the book itself, because I just wanted to read to the viewers a very nice response that Srila Prabhupada sent to yourself, which was, "My dear Bob, please accept my blessings. I thank you very much for your letter dated June 12, 1972. I have noted the sentiments expressed therein with great pleasure. I am very glad to hear that you are associating with us. I know that you are very good boy, very intelligent, and your behavior is gentle. So I have all confidence that very quickly Krishna will bestow all his blessings upon you, and you will feel yourself becoming perfectly happy in Krishna consciousness. Any man with good scientific and philosophical mind, like your good self, must first appreciate what transcendental knowledge is. To get knowledge is the first item for anyone who is hoping to find the perfection of his life." Then he says, "We are just now typing up the tapes of those conversations we held in Mayapur, and we shall be publishing them as a book. It will be called Perfect Questions, Perfect Answers. I shall be very much gladdened to meet you in New York once again. Your ever well-wisher, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Prabhupada ki jai." So that was such a beautiful letter. When you received this letter, could you, if you don't mind, if it's okay, to share some of the points that you were writing to him and then he responded back, and then how you felt about receiving this letter from His Divine Grace?
Well, I'm going to turn to the letter myself.
Yes.
When I received the letter, the mood I wrote the letter, my friend Atreya Rishi was going to see Prabhupada. So he said he would hand deliver a letter from me. So I carefully wrote the letter. Prabhupada had given me some advice. I saw Prabhupada in Calcutta again after we had our days of talking. And I was very confused because there were 70 devotees in Mayapur. And the only electronic device that exists in Mayapur was a ticket machine, like you get at a bakery, where you pull a ticket to who's next. At least it
Yeah.
felt that way, because each devotee would take their turn, because there's only one person to preach to, and there's 70 who wanted to sock it to somebody. So it was me. So Prabhupada kept me in his hut all day with him, I'm convinced, to protect me. There were a lot of nice devotees there, Yadabara, Giriraj Swami, and others, just wonderful people, and Malati, and I had a special interaction with Yamuna. But I didn't know who was a devotee for 2 weeks and who was a devotee at that time, maybe up to 5 years, hardly anybody longer. I had no idea. I couldn't tell. They all looked the same. Funny marks on their head and funny clothes, and they all looked the same to me. So some of them would come up to me and say, "This is what you must do." And there were piles of should. There was so much should, it was built up to my neck. And I had no idea what I ought to do. So when I was back in Calcutta after the Mayapur meeting, I ran to Prabhupada again. I said, "What do I do?" Because I just wanted to understand how to advance. So Prabhupada had said to me, first comes knowledge, then comes austerity. Because many devotees preach, well, the only way you're ever going to understand this is to get up at 2 a.m. Or the only way is to offer your food. Or the only way is to do this. Because each of them were saying what their own austerity was to help them advance. But it's not one size fits all. And that's always been a problem in our movement. Sometimes we believe it's one size fits all, and it's not. The fundamental siddhanta is the same for everyone. There's a regulative principle, 16 rounds. I mean, the general siddhanta is the same, but each of us has our own nature. So I asked Prabhupada what to do, and he gave me the most brilliant of advice, and that is, just associate with devotees, who I can trust, and the rest will come automatically. So I've always taken that as my mantra for the last half a century. And so I wanted to let Prabhupada know, I wrote him, that I'm doing what he asked me to do. And I'm really enjoying the company I have of these devotees, that it means a lot to me, what he wrote to me. So then I just wanted him to know that, and I wanted to offer some grateful appreciation, because he gave me so much time. In the early days of the movement, any devotee could walk in and just see Prabhupada. I was probably the last devotee who got days of Prabhupada's time. After that, the movement was too big, and Prabhupada had to, as you might say, be in somewhat of a bubble, because how could he deal with 10,000 people? And he was depending on his senior people to become his arms and legs and ears and eyes for things. So I just wanted to express gratefulness to him. And he wrote me back when I received that letter. Certainly tears came to my eyes, because he just was, the letter was so touching right to the heart. And that was Prabhupada's way. It was, we pray in the pranam protest, Prabhupada nirvisesa sunyavadi. If somebody asks me, I get asked this question, well, tell me something about Prabhupada. I can say he was an absolute personalist. An absolute personalist.
That's amazing. Absolute personalist. And it's amazing to see that in these days, technology is there, that we have email, we have phones, we have WhatsApp messages. In those days, most of these things did not exist, but still he had this ability, like the letters that you were getting, of staying so personal. And on that basis, when you were having correspondence with Srila Prabhupada, how often how many messages did you have with him where you would write a letter and see? Because I know you did quite a few services as well.
Yeah, that was the only letter I wrote Prabhupada. I felt I just had, I guess I could have, but I felt that I knew what Prabhupada told me to do. And I just didn't really see a need to write him, though I saw Prabhupada. I would see him all the time. In fact, when he'd come to New York, the only cars in New York Temple had is old New York police cars that were just all smashed up. They'd buy at an auction. And then they'd registered in Virginia because they didn't require insurance because there was no money. And so they had no car to pick them up. So my uncle had a Lincoln. So I would borrow the Lincoln, polish it up, and try and pick up Prabhupada at the airport. So I got to see him various times. And sometimes we'd have a little bit of a conversation. So that was sufficient for me. Of course, now I regret I didn't write him more, but I felt that he had given me my instructions. I could get to talk to him sometimes. And there was a lot more, I felt there was a lot more important things for him to do.
Yeah.
I knew what I was supposed to do.
Fantastic. And if I could bring it back to now, we're coming back to Mayapur, and we're in the Bhajan Kutir, and we've started now the recordings of the Perfect Question, Perfect Answers. And this book itself is, I know for a fact, even for myself, this was one of the first books that I came in contact with, being a person that had certain questions, and the way you eloquently asked those questions and the answers that came, I just felt like, wow, this is so convincing. So I want to say personal thank you to you, Brahmatirtha Prabhu, for actually getting this started, because I know for a fact that a lot of universities, a lot of institutions have utilized this book. And even on Harinam book distribution, I've been listening to some of the talks from some of the science people that you talk to, and they say, this is the book I've seen, or this is the book that was distributed to me. So I think a lot of people on this session will be like, very thankful to you. And regarding this book, first question I have, because you have 8 chapters in it, Krishna, the all attractive, the Vedic culture, the real goal of life, the 3 modes of nature, becoming pure, the perfect devotee, acting in knowledge of Krishna, and advancing in Krishna consciousness. It's like the way the topics go is it takes us up and up and up. So was this the order the questions came in? Was there, or was there a specific first question that even when the recordings weren't happening, that was your first question that you asked Srila Prabhupada? Could I ask that question to you?
Yeah. This was, the book is, when I got back from India, I was asked to do fidelity on the manuscript by Jagannatha Brahmachari then. And he asked me to do the fidelity, meaning listen to the tapes and compare it with the manuscript, because it was Mayapur didn't have electricity, but had a little generator, and it was playing music and lectures from the Pandal. And in India at that time, and even at current times, they have so many inventions. They're sending rockets, but the one thing that hadn't been yet invented in India was a volume control. It was always full blast. And when I go back to India, I still notice they're short of volume controls. And excuse my sarcasm, but anyway, they so sometimes it was hard to hear the tape. So even Prabhupada at one point told them to turn that down. So the loudspeakers. So I took the manuscript and I listened to it against a tape as my first service. And the manuscript, I still have it. The manuscript that Jayadvaita Swami handed me was 108 pages. I immediately noticed that was auspicious.
Wow.
So what was the question again? I digressed here.
Your first question. So when you did meet Divine Grace,
the first question, Prabhupada asked about what I'm doing. So I explained that I'm a scientist and I'm training high school teachers for the state of Bihar Department of Education at a grand salary of a few hundred rupees a month. And so then we started discussing a little bit about science. And then when the first recorded conversation begins, it begins with some discussion, follow-up discussion of what is not, basically epistemology. Prabhupada introduced the topic of epistemology to me. I probably didn't even know, I knew the term, but I didn't.
I don't think some will know the term. What does epistemology mean?
The theory of knowledge, how you know what you know.
Okay.
And in the Gita, of course, there's an epistemology is offered of how we know what we know, and that's a critical question to us, and it was a critical question to me. How do I know what I know? And so Prabhupada began in the non-recorded with epistemology, and the book begins with a further discussion of epistemology. And then Prabhupada said, if you really don't know, if all you're doing is saying how you mix together chemicals and make an effervescent, that doesn't really take you anywhere. It's just basically it's just technocrat knowledge. It's not real knowledge, and that real knowledge requires to know where the chemicals come from. So he was trying to take me into the areas of epistemology and ontology, which is a source of beings, or the source of knowledge, a source of being. Taking me into teleology, without using that term in particular. Teleology being, is there purpose in the world? Is there or isn't there? So he was taking me basically through a course in philosophy. Of course, I didn't think of it in those terms then, but that's actually what happened.
Wow. So I'm also conscious that we're getting a lot of comments coming through just about your book that I'm sharing as you're speaking. And we had an auspicious number of people on, what was 108 from the different channels. So I think thank you everybody for those that did come on. And anybody that has a question specifically to do with these early times of Brahmatirtha Prabhu and Srila Prabhupada, please do ask them. And then I will try and bring them up. And as the conversation's progressing, it'd be really nice to hear these points.
And I do see the chat window open here.
Excellent. Yes. And then what I can do is I can put some of them up as well as we're talking. So now that the questions were coming, when did yourself, when you were asking these questions, which for me was, I found amazing and bold, and the type of questions I would love to ask somebody, but I would need to have that courage to really help. And I thank you for asking those questions. So when you ask these questions, when did you feel that, right, I'm feeling convinced now that Krishna consciousness is the way for me? Did it happen at the start, or was there a specific question when you asked?
There was a moment
yes,
where everything changed. And that moment was induced by one of the most wonderful people I ever met on the planet. And that was Yamuna Devi, who everyone knows sings the Govinda prayers every morning. And Yamuna had this combination of heart and head, very smart, but every time she spoke, her heart was in her words. So after my second day of conversations with Prabhupada, it was Gaur Purnima Day. It was a full moon, clear sky. It's February in India. It's clear sky time, dry season, and there was Yamuna came to see me and walked up to me, and with tears in her eyes, and her tears were glowing in the moonlight. And her tears, she said, "You are so fortunate. Prabhupada's giving you all this time every day. You're the most fortunate person around. You are so fortunate to get all this time with Prabhupada." She basically loved bomb me, we call it. And after that, something in me changed. And so I went into the field behind the pandal. And I just collapsed on the ground and did something unusual for me. Just started crying hysterically because I was scared to be a devotee. And I was very scared of it. She basically captured my heart. I knew what was happening because my whole approach was to approach Prabhupada theoretically. Ask this question, ask that. And then I'd think about it. I'm a ponderer, or something like that. So then the next day, Prabhupada called me in to see him, and we're chatting, and it's getting a little personal. Prabhupada says, he asked me if I follow the principles, and I embarrassingly say, well, try to follow at least one of them. And Prabhupada then said, you have to live with us. Then your friends will not ask you, what about marijuana? Because my other Peace Corps friends, they were quite the stoners. And I had my experience, so I wasn't opposed to it, but I really didn't like it anymore. It was like weakening my brain. I knew it. I didn't know what to do about it. And so Prabhupada was talking to me about if you don't undergo voluntary austerity, you're forced to undergo some austerity, Shama Sundar said. And Prabhupada said, that is different between man and animal. An animal cannot accept austerity voluntarily, but a man can. So basically, Prabhupada was saying you ought to take up a little austerity here and try to understand it better. So then at that point, Prabhupada said, this is like the ass. You sit on the back of the ass and hold a morsel of grass in front of his face. The ass is thinking, let me go forward a little. I shall get the grass. But of course, he keeps going forward. So that is assism. So Prabhupada basically was saying, are you going to be an ass? At that point, and Yamuna's image from the night before came to my mind, and I realized, my God, this isn't theoretical anymore. It's about me. So I said to Prabhupada, thank you very much. I have to leave now, go back to my teaching. And Prabhupada said, don't talk Leave, talk Live. I said, I was thinking of returning to my town, but Prabhupada said very sternly to me, don't return. I should stay here? And Prabhupada goes, stay here. If you tell me to, I'll stay. And then Prabhupada said, you're a very good boy. The same way those who have a pet dog would go, good boy, good boy. So at that moment, I knew I was Prabhupada's dog. Before it was theoretical, that I crossed the rubric at that point. And it was a very different conversation. Then Prabhupada said, you're a very good boy. And at that moment, there was a whole change in my mood. There was a long pause. It was much quieter, it says in a book. Then Prabhupada spoke in a much softer tone, describing really going on with me saying less and Prabhupada saying a lot more, talking about when the living entities forget Krishna, they're in the material world, and just talking about philosophy then, how Krishna is present in his name, and the idea that we all have to follow the laws of God, just like people follow the laws of the state. Some of them follow it voluntarily, and some of it follow it by being in prison. So you have your choice. And Prabhupada spoke to me a lot about existential freedom, because Prabhupada never told me, other than stay another day in Mayapur, what to do. There is the existential freedom. And we see the same thing in the Gita. The last instruction Arjuna gets from Krishna is, okay, do what you want to do. And I realized later on that that was almost unique in religious scriptures, where our existential freedom is openly declared. Obedience may be there, but you have your freedom, because bhakti yoga means yoga of love, and obviously love doesn't come without freedom. And so that was the rubric I had to cross at that moment.
Thank you so much for sharing that touching story and your experience, especially with Srila Prabhupada. It's one question I just had, just so I'm aware, what does Peace Corp mean? Because I hear Peace Corp.
Yeah. But, when John Kennedy was president, he decided, there was a book written in the late 50s called The Ugly American. Right now, we could do volume 2 of The Ugly American and have it become a bestseller. After World War II, Europe was all smashed, Japanese, Russia, the whole world was smashed. But America, we hardly had a bullet. I think a German submarine lobbed a few shells on shore in America, but there was no fighting in America. So America then became the superpower. We had the first atomic bomb, and the economic boom hit post-depression, and American superpower. And America has had a certain swagger going back from times of the Monroe Doctrine and Manifest Destiny, and for those who are historians will know all about this. And America had a certain swagger then. And Kennedy said, we can do better than this, going over the world, ignoring the local cultures and just being idiots. And the ugly American put our side in context. So Kennedy was a pretty decent president, apparently a very good person. And he said, we're going to do different. We're going to form a Peace Corps, and we're going to send young Americans overseas, let them live on the local salary. Yeah, I was getting a few hundred rupees a month in India, which at that time was barely enough to live on. And we're going to train them in the language and have them help out local people and do a cultural interaction. So the Peace Corps was in 100 countries. It was very hard to get in the Peace Corps, but very easy to get India. So when I applied to the Peace Corps, and Peace Corps still exists, I requested, put my first, second, and third choice of countries as India. So once I got in, India was one of the least popular destinations. You can go to Jamaica and Fiji and these exotic places, and India was very austere. And then, so when I got in, they said, oh yeah, you want India? You got it. And the only place I would have gone was India, because I wanted to go since I was a boy. Then I went to India. They assigned me the most austere place in India, which was Bihar state, which is considered at that time and currently kind of a state with many problems. And then when I got to Bihar, they assigned me to the most austere assignment in Bihar, which is South Bihar, now Jharkhand state, in Chaibasa. So Krishna gave me the perfect assignment for me in India, because it was the closest assignment, all the Peace Corps, to Calcutta. So I could just go there, and that's how I met Prabhupada. And it was so austere. It was such a difficult assignment that there's no way I'd get too attached to it. So I really wanted to go to India, but I wasn't going to get really attached of wanting to stay there.
So just because you've got that scientific background, and I just wanted to just bring this question up. Daniel Tapia he says, a question please from Peru. So thank you, Daniel, for tuning in. Please, can you tell me how your idea of science changed after meeting Srila Prabhupada?
Well, Daniel, you've asked a very nice question. It was a philosophical change. And of course, the director of the Bhaktivedanta Institute of Higher Studies now, and this is what we deal with every day. And I was under the illusion that science would have the answers, though when I was in an undergraduate school, a very technical engineering school, like an American equivalent of India Institute of Technology. And it was a real nerd school, to put it bluntly. And the humanities department was in the oldest building, the furthest reach of the campus, in the basement. And the only courses I really enjoyed were the humanities. I just couldn't figure out why. And when I talked to Prabhupada, then it answered that question, because the science was answering the question how, not why. For example, if I ask a scientist, why is the sky blue? A scientist say, because it's the refraction of light and all bouncing off of particles, etc. No, that's not why the sky is blue. That's how the sky is blue. Why is a philosophical question.
Yes.
And so what I understood is science is going to tell me how to some degree, but it's not going to tell me why. And the only way to really have a complete picture of the world is to combine science with philosophy. And that was a mission when Prabhupada established the BI, to combine science with philosophy. When we had the 1977 conference, Life Comes from Life, in Vrindavan in October, 1 month before Prabhupada left us, we were having that dialogue. I was there with Sup Damodar and Brahmatirtha then, and Sadhaputta, and a few other scientists. And we're meeting with some very, very big shot scientists, came to Vrindavan, actually, worked out quite well. And every night Prabhupada was too ill to go. He called us in a room. He said, what were your arguments? What were their arguments? And he wanted to see how we combine science and philosophy.
So there we go. So it's science will show us the how, but not answer the why. And that's
Correct.
where you say bring science with philosophy. That's such a nice way of putting it. Thank you so much. And thank you for that question, Daniel. And regarding your days when you were with Srila Prabhupada and the Bhajan Kuti, there are 3 days, if I'm correct. It was 3 days?
Yes, I believe so, yes.
Yeah. And in those 3 days, of course, you would have a certain time where Srila Prabhupada would come. Please walk us through, because it was a festival going on. Walk us through how it happened and how you knew, okay, we're meeting at this time, and any interactions that we wouldn't have known.
It was quite interesting how that happened. I would be doing my duty. I'm pretty good at doing what I'm supposed to do that way. So my duty, I was, there. I said, I'll volunteer. So I was serving out kitri to, thousands of refugees. It was quite a terrible situation after that war. And we were right by the Bangladesh border. So the refugees were unlimited. And somebody would come running up to me and say, Prabhupada wants to see you. I'll be several times a day. And I said, I can't. This is my place in line. And he said, just go. Somebody will cover you. So then I'd walk in and see Prabhupada, and I'd sit down at his feet. And I don't think I offered obeisance then. I didn't quite know all these things, but I would sit, and I intuitively didn't look. He was on a raised platform, so I would intuitively be looking at his feet. And so I would just be staring at his feet as he talked to me. And then conversation would end, and Prabhupada would say enough. Then I'd go back to whatever my seva was, and then somebody would come running. Prabhupada wants to see you again. Remember, that was easy. I was the only guest there. There was one guest. I mean, a few big villagers came, but I was the only English-speaking guest there.
Okay, so you had all this association with Srila Prabhupada. That's it. When after the 3 days were over, what was your feeling like? I know Srila Prabhupada said stay. What was your feeling like after these conversations had finished? Number one, about having those conversations with Srila Prabhupada. Was there any type of reflections you had straight after?
Yeah, I immediately felt I'm done here. There's no point me staying in India. I came to India to search the origin of the Gita, and I was curious who were the legitimate followers of the Gita, because that New York Post centerfold had upset my Apple Card. You couldn't tell who was who. So I needed a scorecard to know, and I knew I had to go to India. And I knew since I was 10 years old, I have to go to India. It was something inside me said I'm going. So after that, I said, I really don't want to be, it's time for me to go home. Shortly after that, the Peace Corps was kicked out of India anyway, because during the India-Pakistan War, the Soviet Union in the Cold War sided with India, and America sided with Pakistan. And we still have remnants of that in the geopolitics of the area. And so just before we were kicked out, I resigned my position and said, I'm going back to America. Also, I had a wonderful fiance in America before I went to India. So I'm married to now for 48 years, and she knew nothing about Krishna. I wrote letters, but she just didn't know what I was talking about. Well, then she came home and she met Prabhupada, and that also changed a lot of things. There's a funny story. When she met Prabhupada, I had no trouble with his accent. I mean, obviously, I had a Bengali accent. I had no trouble because I'd lived in India. Hum kuch Hindi jante hai. I had the swing of things. And so I had no trouble. When she met Prabhupada, she couldn't understand what Prabhupada. She asked Prabhupada a question. She couldn't understand what Prabhupada was saying. So Prabhupada, he's speaking English, of course. So Prabhupada turns to me and goes, translate. was
He
very
became a
funny.
translator.
Yeah, from English to English. It was very funny. The one thing people don't know, people say, tell me something we don't know about Prabhupada. I'll tell you something.
Mm.
We all know Prabhupada had a good sense of humor. Most of us have no idea how good it was, how funny
Yeah.
Prabhupada was. When I listen now, I see all the jokes he was saying and funny things and plays on words. But we were 50-year generation gap with Prabhupada, 10,000-mile cultural gap. And a lot of times we just didn't get it. But Prabhupada was very funny, very relaxed, and it was very easy to be with Prabhupada. We had all this awe and reverence, of course, which we should have. But the Prabhupada I knew was just someone you just wanted to be with.
Wow.
Yeah, it
And I
was
just
really, truly like a well-wishing friend. Not that the friend in any sense of equal, but he just, a well-wishing friend. He wanted to do good things for everybody's with. And I would watch him with others with just awe. That time I understood this is an extraordinary person, something special. And I had some other experiences with some other yogis in India, and they were horribly disappointing, just, shocking to me, actually.
wow. No, thank you so much for sharing. And I just want to just highlight a comment. I put it up before, but I think it's so important. Kamea Mataji saying, "This is my first time hearing Brahmatirtha Prabhu speaking. What a wonderfully humble and gentle personality. He is like the uncle that everybody dreams of having. And thanks to Srila Prabhupada, he in fact is the spiritual uncle of every one of Prabhupada's grandchildren." So thank you so much.
Thank you very much for that comment. It really touches my heart. And wow, thank you so much.
From the interactions I've had with you, I feel so fortunate to be speaking to you, Prabhu, because you have, and we'll go on to some of your points of what you're doing right now as well in Iskcon, which I think is be great to cover. But before that, I've got a few questions coming through. This is from Ami Anand, and she says, Hare Krishna, after having such an amazing interaction with Srila Prabhupada, what would your advice be to anyone in science now?
Get out of it. No, that's a joke. I didn't mean it. Do what Prabhupada wanted me to do, study hard. I mean, I went back to graduate school in India and I studied hard. So study hard, understand science, but the key is get some good association. I urge anyone who's interested in that to get involved in the Bhaktivedanta Institute. We have sanghas every week, one for physicists, one for biologists, one for cosmologists. And we did a conference a year and a half ago, following an instruction Prabhupada gave in the mid-70s. In a letter to the GBC, he said, send me all of your PhDs. We're starting a Bhaktivedanta Institute. All 5 PhDs showed up. And that was it. We did that. So we said, okay, this is what Prabhupada instructed. We're going to do it again. So we did a conference right here in Gainesville, Florida. And we had 400 people show up opening night, including 50 devotee PhDs from all over the world, from Russia,
Wow.
from Australia, South America, India, Europe. So from virtually every continent, we had devotees come. We had a really wonderful 3-day conference on consciousness in science, because that's the real issue. Life comes from life, is conscious in science. Yeah. The hard problem of physics, according to the philosopher David Chalmers, is simply what is consciousness. That's the hard problem. And that's the modern terminology for life comes from life. So a devotee who's studying science, study it hard, know it well, and associate with the BI. You can put out my email address if you want out there, and
please
someone could write me.
I can put it on.
And I will write me, and I will share that email address with Prishni Dasi, one of our BI directors and our corresponding secretary. And our first newsletter is coming out in about 2 weeks. We have a website now.
No, I can put it up for you, Prabhu. I'm just wondering, is this the one with the edu at the end?
Yes,
So
it
I
is.
put it right.
It is.
Okay. So I'm creating that now.
And you can I'll put in here, I'll put the web page down for a BI. Now there are other BI. Here,
Let's add it now, and then
posted.
I'll put that on for you as well.
There are
Fantastic.
other BI groups. We invited all the BI groups. BI kind of splintered just due to how things work. So we invited all to our conference, and we tried to work cooperatively with other groups that do BI work. We pretty much are probably the most active, but a lot of devotees who, under the banner of BI, are doing some nice work all over the world. So somebody can work with us, can work with another group. If somebody writes us and their interest is college preaching in India, I'll put them in touch with, for example, some of Sri Damodar Maharaj's followers who are really doing wonderful work that way.
Fantastic. So just so everybody, I put it on. So if you want to email, please email Prabhu. It's at bobcohen@ivs.edu, and also check out their website, which is www.bihstudies.org. So these are the two. So Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies.
That was Prabhupada's original name for the BI. Also, the IVS stands for the Institute for Vaishnava Studies. We've been publishing books for years, and we recently brought all of Sadhaputa's books back into print, and it's on Amazon under Richard L. Thompson. So all of his books are in print, and we're in negotiations with Motilal now for them to continue. They've carried it in the past, all of Sadhaputa's books in India. And Sadhaputa's books are available on the Indian version of Amazon too.
So please check these out. And I'm going to keep this scrolling so everybody can see. We have a few minutes left. So any other questions coming in, please do message in. This is your opportunity to get the association of Brahmatirtha Prabhu right now. And we've had another, just a comment saying, such a beautiful opportunity for us to hear about Srila Prabhupada Leela from you. We are so fortunate to hear from you personally. Thank you, Mayapur TV. So that's, thank you, Mira, for sharing. And then also, I'm just going to go down. Okay, well, I'm just checking this question. But before I do, I just wanted to ask you, Prabhu, regarding your services, because you are a professional mediator. And like I mentioned, a co-director of Iskcon Resolve, and also the director of Bhaktivedanta Institute for Higher Studies. Was Srila Prabhupada, did he impact you on actually, when you came into these type of services, because you're doing this for in Iskcon, was Srila Prabhupada influential on those services that you're doing?
Well,
was there any type of instruction?
Yeah, excuse me. The last thing I did I saw Prabhupada was right before he left, was at the Life Comes from Life conference. I was one of the scientists that was there. So I knew how important this was to Prabhupada. And then Sadhaputta and I became fast friends, up until the moment he passed on. And my involvement with the BI was mostly to assist him because he had the real brain. But I had some organizational ability, so I could help him with certain things. When he passed on, it was just a big void for me. And then some of us got together, his friends from this area, and we decided to get his books back in print, and the late Yamaraj dedicated that till his dying breath. And then from that, we just kind of morphed into a BI. The Iskcon Resolve, the very first time I saw Prabhupada in Calcutta, there was a dispute going on in the back of the room. Two devotees were arguing. And I thought, the devotees I'd met, of course, devotees explained that Prabhupada was Jagat Guru, blah, 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 just as devotees would present. And I said, well, how can people be arguing when the Jagat Guru is here? Why don't they just ask him? And I was kind of like I noticed that, and it was really strange. Later on, I understood the rest of the story, what happened. And it gave me a really important lesson. One of the devotees was a Swami who was having spiritual trouble and wasn't going to make it as a Swami. And the other one was kind of talking to him. But this devotee had made up his mind already. And Prabhupada knew, I could tell, that this devotee was going to violate Prabhupada's instructions. And if Prabhupada gave him another instruction not to, then he'd be violating 2 instructions. And so Prabhupada just knew, better let nature take his course. And I watched that. We had a horrible incident in New York where the temple president's wife did the weirdest things I've ever seen in a movement. And I watched how Prabhupada dealt with it. And he sent 3 senior devotees to investigate, but how he dealt with all the various devotees involved. And it was such brilliance for resolving conflict. Then later on, when Iskcon Resolve began, I realized I had a chance to do something that was bothering me for decades, and that was Samadarshana. As devotees, we all believe in Samadarshana, but we have so many dichotomies, us and the karmis, this and that. And I wanted Prabhupada to explain to me the higher vision of seeing Krishna within everyone. So I saw Iskcon Resolve as my personal way to purify myself for Samadarshana. And then I took tons and tons of courses and training. So if we work at something long enough and we have the nature, we can do it. So I do conflict resolution Iskcon, but I saw that just as a follow-up of how I saw Prabhupada dealing with conflict. And then Iskcon Resolve gave me a chance to get a training and practice in that. And obviously there are people much better at it than me, like Raja Bihari and others, but it's worked out well. It's helped me have my own Samadarshana, because we're always fighting us and them. And the goal of philosophy is a unity behind the many. And though Prabhupada at times would step down, as he called it, the second platform to make distinctions for protecting us, Prabhupada's ultimate vision was seeing Krishna within everyone. And we have to have that ultimate vision, though sometimes we must step down and make some distinctions just to protect the movement and ourselves.
Thank you so much. That's really nice to hear. And I'm getting some questions coming in, so I'm going to put them up. Melissa Husa, if I'm correct, she says, would you say that reading Srila Prabhupada's books is a good start for a non-scientist who tries to have conversations with friends who are devotees of science, but don't find the need to have Krishna?
Well, listen, you asked a question that I've asked too. I like that question a lot. I would say for a non-scientist to have the best book for you to read is simply the one you're going to read. It's as simple as that. If you're going to read a book and you're not really going to read it, it's not going to work. So when somebody especially new, I always try to find what's their interest. For example, somebody may be interested in philosophy. There's the right book. Somebody's interested in questions and answers. Well, I know that book. And somebody else is interested in biographies. I've given Radhanath Swami's Journey Home as a first book to many people because that's the one that's going to match them. And that's going to match their interests. So I try to match up the person's interests. And that's what Prabhupada would do when he'd have conversations. He did it with me. It wasn't recorded. Found out where I'm at. And then things went from there. So, and of course, Prabhupada had the ability to read someone's face and know right away where they're at. I mean, I watched that many times, that ability. So for the rest of us who may not be so adroit, we get to know someone. St. Francis says, if you want to be understood, what do? You understand. First you understand, then you're going to be understood. So the best books are the ones that someone really will take an interest in.
Fantastic.
And we have plenty of books. Some are written by Prabhupada, some Prabhupada's followers, some about Prabhupada, and whatever book works to get them in. Some people, Prabhupada's Gita is the best one to give them. Some people, because the language may be archaic and to some, I may give them a different book, and then they'll read Prabhupada's Gita with great appreciation.
No, fantastic. So check the audience and then see which book would be best for them suited. Right, just a few more questions and we must we're coming. But these questions are really nectar. So thank you, everybody. Sarva Medley, she says, did Srila Prabhupada share anything on his vision for the development of the Mayapur project early on with you?
Well, that's an important question. The answer, when I was there, Prabhupada envisioned a whole city. He laid the cornerstone for the Lotus building, went deep down into the ground and down a ladder and put the cornerstone. And so Prabhupada envisioned a whole city. I couldn't imagine such a thing happening. It reminds me of the story of some subway conductor in New York came forward after Prabhupada passed on. And he said, yes, I met your guru in 1965 before Prabhupada had any followers. We were sitting on a park bench together. And he said, so what do you do? And Prabhupada said, oh, I have thousands of disciples and hundreds of temples and big cities. And I have all these things. And the fellow said, but you look very poor. Where is it all? And Prabhupada said, oh, it is simply separated from me by time. And so all I saw is Prabhupada met with his godbrothers. They came to see him, and he was extremely respectful to them. And he envisioned what he was doing, but I wasn't in on the details. And many of those conversations, of course, were in Bengali. So I knew a little Hindi, but zero Bengali. So I couldn't pick up on anything. And then many of the conversations Prabhupada did privately with his godbrothers. But I've had many, many talks with one of my dear friends who lives nearby me is Harikesh Prabhu. And we've had many, many talks about this. And I think he and Jayapataka Swami received more instructions from Prabhupada than anybody. And Prabhupada had a real clear vision from the very beginning what he wanted in Mayapur. Our master planning, I suspect, has not always followed it strictly, but he certainly wanted a grand temple, and he certainly wanted to become a place of pilgrimage, and Prabhupada has succeeded. When I went to the Mayapur festival, there was one guest. Now at Corp, typically 1 million, and the governor sometimes comes in by helicopter, and you have the picture.
Yes. No, thank you. I've just got a lovely message from Sham Gopika Devidasi. She said, Hare Krishna Prabhu, thank you so much for this beautiful katha. Indeed, it was amazing to hear your personalist realizations with Prabhupada. We would love to see you again in Mayapur. I would like to ask that after you visited Mayapur for the first time, when did you come to Mayapur again? And can I just extend that question to when are you planning, if hopefully with this coronavirus goes down, to go again? So when was the first time after Srila Prabhupada? And then when are you going to come again?
Yeah, I went to Mayapur in the mid-'80s, and I couldn't believe what I saw. And then I went again Mayapur in 96 because I was in Calcutta for Sut Damodar Maharaj's Bhaktivedanta Institute conference. Well, my last 2 trips to India were just Vrindavan. I went for Kartik. So as Krishna plans, I have a ticket, which I'm not going to use, to go to Vrindavan for the Govardhan retreat in December, but COVID will have different plans. So maybe in March, Jayapataka Swami wants me to come when they inaugurate the exhibit at the Bhajan Kutir. So I don't know when that will be,
amazing.
but I'd love to go to Mayapur. Vrindavan was a place that was scary for me because it was kind of a heavier vibe. Mayapur is more relaxed. But finally, after a lot of prayer and good association with people like Burajan and Satchidananda Swami and Indradumna Swami, I was able to finally get a little taste for Vrindavan, because it's a little different. So I've focused on Vrindavan, but I think my next trip may be Mayapur. We'll see. As Lord, I found that when I want to go to India, I can only go when I I seem to get a divine invitation because I make my plans and they don't work, and I don't have plans, and next thing I know, I'm in India. So it's very mysterious to me.
So look out, hopefully March, as you just
Yeah.
heard here today.
COVID, of course,
COVID.
affects everything. I anticipate by the beginning of the year we'll understand what's going on. It's just a strange time, but it isn't all the sadness of COVID, especially Bhakti True Swami, which is in grief beyond. We all have that beyond description. Nevertheless, the Yamuna River is blue again, so something good has happened.
Yes. And I'm going to finish with one last comment from Chaya Patel. She says, good association is key, like you mentioned. Srila Prabhupada's first instruction to you, do not leave, live. Have good association with devotees. Thank you for sharing your spiritually uplifting association with His Grace Yamuna Mataji, Chudamani Dasi. So on this basis of association, I just wanted to say thank you so much, Brahmatirtha Prabhu, for sharing such lovely insights. And I think a lot of people on this session now feel like they have a spiritual uncle that they can get in contact with if they, and I'm going to put your details back on so everybody can see.
Of course.
I'm just going to take it.
So
I just want to say thank you for that.
Yeah, I just warn people I can be slow on email because there's too many of them, but I'll answer everything eventually. On that point of association, Bhakti True Swami gave a wonderful class maybe a year ago, and in it he said why he is so loyal to Iskcon. Now, any of us who have been in Iskcon a half a century have what I call a purple heart. A purple heart's a medal given to soldiers in America who are wounded in combat. So none of us have been in Iskcon, for a half a century that don't have a series of purple hearts. It's just the nature of the yuga. I mean, all these things happen. But we're all, Bhakti True put it this way, it's just, Iskcon is what Prabhupada wanted us to be in. And Prabhupada would paraphrase the English saying, and it would say, I love the Iskcon, right or wrong. That doesn't mean the wrongs in Iskcon and the mistakes that are made are just ignored or 1984 double think. That's why we have Iskcon Resolve, GBC. We have systems. They're not perfect. I'm on the Sabah. We try to do things to improve the society. But as Bhakti True Swami put it, no matter what happens, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, as Hamlet said, the question is not to be or not to be an Iskcon. The question is how to be an Iskcon and how to find the association that works for us.
There we go. What lovely concluding words. The question is how to be in Iskcon and find the association that works for us. This is so been absolute privilege and honor to speak to you today. And I feel it may not be our last time, if that's okay.
I am quite humbled to have an audience like this. Due to COVID, I've never heard more classes in my life live, and I've never given more classes. So all the sadness COVID has given us, it's given us an opportunity. And I never would have met you, who's one of the best interviewers I've ever interviewed with. You're fabulous, not only because of the way you ask questions and the way you set it up and the way you prep me of how to set up tech properly and mentally for it, but just your demeanor. I observe good interviewers, and good interviewers elicit when somebody does a good interview, it's because the interviewer knows how to elicit the best of responses, and you have that ability wonderfully so.
Thank you for the blessings. And we'll see everybody. Please do check out, as as Kaminiya Mataji said, Prabhu's going to get a lot of love-bombed messages coming in his emails. So Bob Cohen at ivs.edu, and also the website, please check it out, www.bihstudies.org. These are the two places to connect.
Yeah.
Let's take this further and let's keep this association going. Thank you so much. And the final thing I think I have to say is Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
To yourself, and we'll see again, everybody, next week, where we'll be talking to Her Grace Malati Prabhu on her experience.
She was in Mayapur with me as Prabhupada's cook, so I'll be tuning into that one. I love Malati.
Fantastic.
I just love Malati.
Thank you so much. We look forward to. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna, everyone.